So we're here with Kimberly Olson from Lucent Clinical Consulting. And Kim, you were a big part of our pre-conference IVD symposium, which was a huge hit by all accounts. So tell us a little bit about what led to that and why we did that event.
Yes. The regulatory standards are changing rapidly around the world, and those standards are going to affect the ability of manufacturers to quickly and efficiently move their products into the commercial space. And so having a symposium to educate stakeholders of all kinds on, what are the state-of-the-art requirements, how best to apply them, and to, minimize, if you will, any burden in trying to get to market. That was the purpose of the symposium, and it was thrilling to have such a wide audience there yesterday.
Well, it was very well reviewed. So why now? Some of these regulations aren't new, right?
Yes, they're not new. ISO 20916, right, which is the Good Study Practice Guideline for IVDs, was published in 2019, and then obviously the IVD regulation for the European Economic Area has been in effect since 2017 and now is in transition. So they're not necessarily new, but I think that a lot of companies maybe have products in Europe, they registered under the old IVD directive, but now they need to start preparing for IVD regulation when their certificates expire. So now is the perfect time.
Do you think companies are prepared?
That's a great question. Interestingly, in our symposium, we did live audience polling so we could understand current trends on key issues. And in our audience polling, we learned that about 1/3 of our audience members claimed that their organizations were ready and they were comfortable, and yet zero attendees said that they actually had read the IVD regulation standard and actually understood it. So again, what a great opportunity to kind of bring everyone together, all the stakeholders, and actually we had regulators in the room, we had industry in the room. It was really a nice conversation.
And all these changes are happening in the context of an exploding market, right? This is a high growth area in healthcare.
Yes. So, most companies, when you think of devices, you think of active implantable medical devices. In vitro diagnostics are also classified as medical devices, right? And they're used to perform testing outside of the human body. Those results are used to guide, treatment decisions or to assess patient health status. And IVDs become important because markets such as the precision medicine, so think cancer diagnostics as an example, it's exploding. So right now you're probably talking about a, $50 to $60 billion market, and probably by about 2028 that market will have more than doubled to about 150 billion. So compound growth rate.
A little bit of growth.
Yeah, more than 12%. And so if the market grows that fast, you've got to have enough of these diagnostic products that are available. Lots of these diagnostics, are also then associated with drug treatments. And so while here we're talking about devices, right, with Amy, cancer diagnostics or other types of diagnostics are used with drugs. If you don't think about how important these regulatory requirements need to be designed now, the devices, the IVD devices, as well as the drugs need to become available at the same time. If you don't plan your device side correctly, you actually could be holding up your drug trial by 11 months in Europe if you don't realize. And again, every day you're not on market is really millions impacted. So many more millions of patients.
11 months is a career-changing delay.
It really is. And so we now have companies that are working with companion or complementary diagnostics with the pharmaceutical industry who are just now experiencing these delays for the first time. So again, thank you for allowing us to have our symposium. A lot of eyes were opened because nobody knew how many more steps need to be involved. And so if you're planning a diagnostic, you've got to actually be doing this planning really early in drug development phase. So I wish more pharmaceutical companies could have also attended this meeting just to learn what that message is. But hopefully we reached enough manufacturers to get them thinking.
Well, we'll keep trying.
Now's the time.
Keep trying. Joe, how's this tie back to the standard side?
I was going to say the ISO 20916, the clinical studies or clinical trials standard for IVDs published by ISO TC 212, CLSI runs that ISO International Committee for ISO. That's an important one that I really want to delve into. But before we get there, what else do they need to do? What are the other new big areas that the IVD directive in Europe is requiring of manufacturers?
Oh, the IVD regulation?
Yes, sorry.
Well,
regulation.
there are a lot of changes, right, associated with the IVD regulation. And in our symposium, we actually had Dr. Stefan Bird, who is the IVD expert at BSI, actually come and give his expertise from a notified body perspective. His advice was, it was really, really telling, because he said, look, for those of you that are on the market today and you were certified under the old directive, you know, you're fine. You think you have a couple of years until your certificates expire. He said, but, right, before maybe notified bodies looked at 20% of IVDs. Under the IVD regulation, however, it's now 80% of IVDs require a notified body review. There are not enough notified bodies out there who will be able to help to recertify this now expected tsunami wave of certificate requests that are going to be coming in the next couple of years. So his advice was really, really telling. He said, honestly, if you haven't started planning now to get in line, I advise you to get in line right now. And people were madly writing down, you know, something on the to-do list. So really important consideration.
Critical point is you need to be lining up now for your notified body review in two or 3 years. Because
exactly.
You're not going to be, in 2 or 3 years, you're going to be getting in the back of the line.
There will be no line, and then comes the problem.
Right.
You may have to do something to not have your product available.
Now, the IVD regulation also requires manufacturers, I believe, to comply with the Quality Management System Standard 13485 and Risk Management Standard 14971, I believe.
Yes.
In addition to that. So those are also systems that will need to be in place and fully operational before you do that.
Yes. To comply with the IVDR requires really, for many manufacturers, a revision of all of their procedures. And again, the advice we heard, Dr. Claudia Dollins, right, she's former acting branch chief at the FDA, now works in pharmaceutical industry, as well gave advice. You know, you cannot take your FDA report and then send that in to comply with IVD regulation. It won't be accepted. So really looking at your processes, and each of our panelists walked through very carefully and what those requirements needed to be in order to, you know, streamline the process. Nobody wants things to be late. And again, for manufacturers, the metric is time to market. You do not want to waste a day because you forgot one of the requirements.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the clinical trial standard, the clinical study standard, because people are already utilizing that, and they're already working with, I think, local authorities in Europe. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what is required there and what sort of experiences you've heard or had with actually implementing that in trials in Europe.
Yeah. So for IVDs, right, ISO 20916 is the good study practice standard for IVDs. The standard should be applied if you're going to be registering your IVD, so a clinical performance study for regulatory registration. That standard, again, was published in 2019. I was lucky to be part of that working group that authored the standard. The standard isn't necessarily harmonized with the IVDR. It's a timing thing. IVDR was published, then 20916 was published. However, the IVD regulation clearly states that you need to consider what the current relevant state-of-the-art standards guidances are. So for those types of studies, compliance to 20916 is recommended. The application of the standard, actually the standard is designed in a way to follow the life cycle of a clinical performance study, you know, the planning, development of the protocol, the execution of the study, and the final report. And following that standard is very specific to IVDs. So there's always a confusion. There are all these things called good clinical practice standards. People will think ICHE 6 for drugs or ISO 14155 for medical devices. Those actually are not optimized to IVDs, and 20916 provides very specific details justify what type of if you need to do an interventional study, what types of samples do you need? There's a whole section to justify how you're going to be using those samples. So the standard is written in a way to streamline and make it easier for manufacturers to know what are the required elements and to make sure the study is performed with high degree of integrity, ethics, etc. And as we're learning about how manufacturers are now using, if you will, 20916 and trying now to do those studies in Europe. Now, again, I'll take the example of some sort of a precision medicine diagnostic timed with a drug protocol. Drug company is going to march on, and they set a date, and that's when they want to go. But now, because of the IVD regulation, there are multiple steps. So you'll take your protocol. If it's an interventional clinical study, meaning that the diagnostic could be used for treatment decisions or presents with higher risk to the subject that whose sample is used in the study, you may have to go to an ethics committee, and then after that you have to go to the country's competent authority. And if there are questions, then you have this now ping-pong back and forth. Sometimes it may have to go even higher than the competent authority. And we're learning feedback I hear from across many companies, depending upon which country. We're learning that not all countries are following the process in the same way. We're learning in some countries, I'm not going to say which ones, we are hearing that the cycle time to get your IVD protocol approved can take up to 12 or 11 months. 11 months. So again, if you want to get the drug on the market, you need to have thought of starting, getting your IVD protocol like 11 months sooner. The other consideration that, the concern that we see then, if companies are thinking that it's going to be that long, and they don't know for sure if it's going to be that long, because countries are learning and everyone's experimenting, is I'm hearing stories about companies just completely pulling out of Europe. And again, you worry from a patient access perspective, the ability to really drive innovation, that's a problem. And somebody needs to talk about this. So these are the issues that we're trying to raise awareness, to educate people, and to help them so they don't run into these problems by giving them early advice and really encouraging them to use the standards, be very consistent.
And it sounds like it may even starting now and being on top of things, Europe is still working their way through. So it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, even if you're prepared.
Yeah. I think so. Like any new standard, the pendulum goes from a little bit complex, and then it will swing back. Mm-hmm. There's been some excellent guidance documents on the IVD regulation that have been published that have been very, very helpful to sponsors of clinical performance studies. So I see it getting better, but it just hurts me to know that if somebody actually thinks, a company has to think that they need to back away, in a way it gets in the way of innovation, mm-hmm. and it gets in the way of patients. And so that's not what we're here for. We're here to make things get to market faster so patients can get better. So it's quite a conundrum that we're in. I'm happy to see that we're having these standards, because really the spirit and the intent is that there were problems in the past. We want therapies that are out there that are safer and better for patients. And so this is a bit of a learning and a transition period. It's normal. It can be expected. But this requires then we really need to be loud about helping people to plan early. And that's what I do. And that's why I'm so thankful we could have our symposium.
Well, yeah, and I was keeping track of the math on my little notepad here as you're going through this. Some of these numbers don't work. I mean, they just literally, especially with what you're talking about in terms of the number of notified bodies that are available to processes, if we don't act with a real sense of urgency, there's definitely a huge sort of crush point coming in the market. And when would that? Is that a couple of years out? Is that? I mean,
it depends upon the risk classification of your device. So the higher risk, and if you had a certificate under the old IVD directive, actually you have a shorter period of time. If you have a lower risk, like a Class A or Class B, you probably have until 2027, I think, to
so there is a little stratification of the risk in the marketplace, and a logical sequence to how to sort of attack this problem.
You worry that people maybe wait a little too late to
right.
get in line. So, we
Right.
always describe it's kind of like the big popular nightclub, and there's a big red velvet rope in the front, and, if you're not in line, you're not getting in. And so we really, really encourage companies to think carefully about their plans, working with their notified bodies early at making sure that they're doing what they need to do to prioritize, to triage, but also to get their processes up to speed and making sure that their applications are going to be compliant. And again, saying I'm going to take my old FDA report and just send it in, we heard clearly from our experts, we will not accept that. It's not going to meet this standard. So, wow.
Well, we're on board. We're ready to help. Joe, any last questions?
I want to say we really appreciate your help with this symposium. We want to continue this effort to try to get the word out about what people need to do and that they need to do it now. So
Yeah.
thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.